They laughed when I fired that flare into the night sky, called me paranoid, dramatic, insane. My own team turned their backs as I screamed about what was coming, but when the real threat descended and their screams replaced their mockery, guess who they came crawling back to for survival? I'm Thea, and this is the story of how I went from the crazy girl everyone ignored to the only reason any of them are still breathing. If you love stories where the underestimated rise up and karma hits harder than an Arctic blizzard, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about trusting your gut when the whole world tells you you're wrong. 6 months ago, I thought I'd found my dream job. Lead meteorological analyst at a remote Arctic research station, studying atmospheric patterns that most scientists never get close to. I was 28, brilliant, at least I thought so, and hungry to prove myself in a field dominated by people who'd been doing this since before I was born. The station was small, just 8 of us total, living in this isolated bubble of steel and science surrounded by endless white. My supervisor was Dr. Ronan Pierce, one of those men who believed his PhD gave him permission to talk down to everyone else. Brilliant, sure, but arrogant in a way that made your skin crawl. Then there was Bexley, my roommate, and the closest thing I had to a friend up there, at least in the beginning. We'd bonded over late-night coffee and shared frustrations about Ronan's condescending lectures. And Holden, the golden boy everyone adored, with his perfect smile and his ability to make even data analysis sound charming, the rest of the team just followed whoever had the loudest voice in the room. Everything changed 3 weeks before the incident. I was running my usual atmospheric scans when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The electromagnetic readings were off, not just a little, but catastrophically wrong. There was something building in the upper atmosphere, something massive and dangerous that shouldn't exist according to every model we had. I spent 48 hours straight verifying the data, running simulations, checking and rechecking, because I knew how insane it would sound. When I finally brought it to Ronan, my hands were shaking as I laid out the printouts on his desk. He didn't even look up from his coffee. "Thea, you're seeing patterns that aren't there." Again. That word, again, hit me like a physical blow. He was referencing an incident 2 years ago at my previous posting, a false alarm that I'd never been allowed to forget, that followed me like a shadow everywhere I went in this field. But this was different. I could feel it in my bones. The anomaly wasn't just present, it was growing, exponentially. Day by day I tried explaining it to Bexley one evening in the mess hall, pulling up the data on my tablet, my voice urgent and low. She looked at the screen for maybe 3 seconds before literally turning her back on me mid-sentence and walking over to Holden's table. I watched them laugh, watched Bexley lean in and whisper something that made the whole group erupt. I caught the words paranoid and desperate for attention floating across the room like daggers. The isolation I felt in that moment wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Like the Arctic cold had finally found a way inside my chest and frozen everything solid. These were supposed to be my people, my team, and they were treating me like I was the threat instead of trying to warn them about the real one coming for all of us 1 week before everything went to hell. I did something I'd been avoiding. I requested an emergency team meeting. I knew what it meant, knew I was putting a target on my back, but the data was screaming at me now and I couldn't stay silent anymore. We gathered in the main conference room, all 8 of us, and I could feel the hostility before I even opened my mouth. I started presenting my findings, satellite data, electromagnetic patterns, atmospheric pressure models that showed something catastrophic building above us. Ronan interrupted me before I finished my second slide. "Are you seriously suggesting we evacuate a multi-million-dollar research station based on what, Thea? Your gut feeling?" His voice dripped with contempt, and I watched the others nod in agreement. Holden leaned back in his chair with that infuriating smirk and said, "Maybe Thea needs a break. This isolation can mess with anyone's head, right?" The suggestion hung in the air like poison. Then Bexley spoke, and her words cut deeper than anyone else's could. "I used to defend you, Thea. I really did. But this obsession is embarrassing. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement, arms crossing, heads shaking. 7 pairs of eyes looked at me like I was something broken, something dangerous that needed to be contained. That night, I sat alone in the common area, trying to process the humiliation, when Ronan made an announcement to the group. For team morale and safety, we're implementing a new protocol effective immediately. All emergency alerts must be approved by 2 senior staff members before being acted upon. He never said my name. He didn't have to. Every single person in that room turned to look at me, and I felt my face burn with shame so intense it was painful. Bexley whispered something to the researcher next to her and they both snickered, not even trying to hide it. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on them. This wasn't just professional disagreement anymore. This was public execution, and they were all enjoying the show. 2 days before the incident, I hadn't slept in over 60 hours. The readings were critical now, undeniable, and I knew we had maybe 48 hours before whatever was coming would hit. I cornered Ronan in the lab, made sure the door was closed, and demanded he look at my data one more time. You need to look at this. Now. I didn't care about protocol anymore, didn't care about his ego. He slammed his hand down on the desk so hard I jumped. Enough, Thea! I am done entertaining your delusions. His voice carried through those thin walls, and I knew everyone could hear him destroying me. One more outburst like this, and you're on the next transport out. Do I make myself absolutely clear? I was shaking, not with fear but with pure rage mixed with terror for all of us. When this hits, when people die, their blood is on your hands, not mine. His face went dark, a vein pulsing in his temple. Get out of my lab now! I left, but not before I saw it in his eyes. That flicker of doubt he'd never admit to, that tiny voice in his head wondering if maybe, just maybe, I was right. But his pride was bigger than his doubt, and pride, I was about to learn, could kill everyone. 24 hours before the world ended, I sat alone in my quarters staring at my equipment, and the data wasn't just bad anymore, it was apocalyptic. A massive geomagnetic storm coupled with an atmospheric plasma event, something so rare that most scientists go their entire careers without seeing one. This wasn't just going to knock out our electronics. This was going to tear the sky apart, flood us with lethal radiation levels, and turn our metal station into a death trap. I'd run every calculation 3 times, checked every variable, and the math didn't lie. We had maybe 36 hours, probably less. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew exactly what it would cost me. But watching people die because they were too arrogant to listen? That wasn't something I could live with. Even if they'd spent weeks making my life hell, evening came, and everyone gathered in the mess hall for dinner like it was just another ordinary night. I could hear their voices through the walls, relaxed and easy, probably still making jokes about the crazy meteorologist who couldn't accept reality. I grabbed the emergency flare kit from the equipment locker, my hands steady for the first time in days, and headed outside to the observation deck. The Arctic night wrapped around me, cold and vast and infinite. I loaded the first flare, aimed it at the sky, and fired. The red light screamed upward, painting the snow in crimson, beautiful and terrible against the aurora borealis, then the second, then the third. 3 red flares, the international distress signal, the one you only use when lives are at stake, the one that alerts every emergency service within 200 miles. I stood there watching them arc across that dark sky, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. I'd done what I could. Whatever happened next was on them. The peace lasted about 30 seconds. The team flooded outside, and Ronan's face was purple with rage. "What the hell are you doing?" he screamed, close enough that I could see the spit flying from his mouth. Holden pushed past him, laughing in disbelief. "She's completely lost it. She's actually lost her mind." Bexley came up behind them, her voice dripping with fake concern that made me want to scream, "Thea, sweetie, this isn't healthy. You need help." I stood my ground, chin up, voice clear. "There's a massive atmospheric event coming. We need to evacuate right now." Ronan got in my face, so close I could smell his coffee breath. Those flares just alerted every emergency service in the region you've committed a federal offense. Do you understand what you've done? The team formed a circle around me, and I felt like prey surrounded by predators. Someone shouted that I should be sedated. Another yelled to get me inside before I hurt myself. The panic in their voices wasn't about the storm. It was about me, about controlling me, silencing me. Then Bexley stepped forward, and I saw something ugly twist across her face. I defended you for years, made excuses for you to everyone. And this is how you repay us? Before I could even process what was happening, her hand cracked across my face. The slap echoed in the frozen air, sharp and brutal. My cheek burned, my ears rang, and for a moment there was just stunned silence, then scattered approval from the crowd, murmurs of, "She deserved that," and "Someone had to." Ronan's voice cut through it all. "Lock her in her quarters, I'll deal with her in the morning." Holden and another researcher grabbed my arms and dragged me inside. I didn't fight. I just kept my eyes on the sky because I could see it starting, that faint shimmer on the horizon that meant I was right, and we were all running out of time. They locked me in my quarters like a prisoner, and I could hear them through the walls celebrating my removal, like they'd just won some kind of victory. "Finally, we can get back to actual work," someone said, and the others laughed. "Should have done this weeks ago," another voice added. I pressed my face against the small window, watching the sky, watching the aurora pulse and writhe in ways that should have terrified anyone with half a brain. My backup equipment, the analog devices I'd hidden in my room because I knew this day might come, started going haywire. The needles swung wildly, the readings spiking into zones that shouldn't be possible 30 minutes, maybe less. I tried the door one more time, knowing it was useless, and then I just sat on my bed and waited for the world to prove me right in the worst possible way. The lights flickered first, just once, barely noticeable, the kind of thing you might ignore if you weren't waiting for it. Then came the sound. I'll never forget that sound, like the sky itself was tearing open, fabric ripping on a cosmic scale. The aurora exploded overhead, transforming from gentle ribbons of light into something violent and alive, writhing tentacles of green and purple and red that looked nothing like the peaceful phenomenon we'd studied. It wasn't beautiful anymore. It was hungry. The power died completely, plunging everything into darkness, and for a heartbeat there was silence. Then the emergency lights kicked on with their sickly yellow glow, and I had maybe 3 seconds of relief before those died too. The electromagnetic pulse had hit, exactly when I'd predicted, exactly how I'd warned them. Every electronic device in the station was fried, dead, useless. But that wasn't even the worst part. Through my window, I watched the sky catch fire. The atmospheric plasma event turned the ionosphere into sheets of visible, deadly radiation, burning across the sky like the atmosphere itself was being incinerated. The northern lights had become a weapon, and we were trapped underneath it. I could feel the temperature dropping already, the backup heating systems as dead as everything else, and I knew we had hours, not days, before hypothermia became as much a threat as the radiation. Then I heard the screams. Real screams, not the mocking laughter from before, but pure terror. Ronan's voice, high and panicked in a way I'd never heard. "We need to initiate emergency protocols." Holden, all that smooth confidence gone. "Nothing's working. Nothing's working." And Bexley, crying now, her voice cracking. "What's happening? What is that thing?" The pounding on my door started seconds later, desperate fists hammering against the metal. Thea, open up, please." I sat there in the darkness, listening to them beg, and I won't lie to you. Part of me wanted to let them suffer just a little bit longer, not because I'm cruel, but because I'm human, and they'd spent weeks making me feel insane for trying to save their lives. The pounding got more frantic. "Thea, you were right. Oh God, you were right. We need your help." It was Ronan's voice, all that arrogance stripped away, replaced by raw fear. I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and pressed my palm against the cold metal. "I can't," I said, loud enough for him to hear. "I'm locked in, remember?" The scrambling on the other side was immediate, the sound of tools against the lock mechanism, and when that door finally burst open and I saw their faces, pale, terrified, looking at me like I was their last hope, I felt something shift inside me. Because I was their last hope. I was the only one who'd prepared for this, and now they were going to learn what it meant to need someone they'd spent weeks destroying. Ronan stood in my doorway, and I'd never seen a man look so small. Behind him, the entire team huddled together like scared children, their faces illuminated by the dying glow of a handheld flashlight someone had managed to keep in a drawer. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who'd formed a circle around me just hours ago to mock and humiliate me were now circling me for an entirely different reason. They needed me, desperately, and we both knew it. "Thea," Ronan's voice cracked, "please. You were right about everything. We need your help." I stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of every dismissal, every eye roll, every cruel laugh. Then I spoke, my voice calm and cold as the Arctic air seeping through the damaged walls. "You want my help?" He nodded so fast it looked painful. I stepped forward, looking each of them in the eye. Ronan, Holden, Bexley, every single person who'd made me feel like I was losing my mind. "Then you listen to every single word I say. No questions, no debates, no second guessing. You do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, or we all die here. Those are my terms." Holden started to say something, probably some attempt to negotiate or maintain some shred of authority, and I cut him off so fast his mouth hung open. "I don't have time for your ego, Holden. I don't have time for anyone's ego. People die or people live. You choose right now." The silence that followed was delicious. You could taste their surrender in the air. Bexley stepped forward then, tears streaming down her face, that same face that had twisted with disgust before she slapped me. "Thea, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." I held up my hand, stopping her mid-grovel. "Save it, Bexley. We can deal with feelings if we survive the next 18 hours right now. Follow me if you want to live." I pushed past them into the corridor, and the sound of their footsteps scrambling behind me was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. I led them down to the sub-level, to a section of the station most of them had never bothered to explore because it was just storage and mechanical systems, boring and beneath their brilliant minds. But I'd been coming down here every night for 3 weeks. During those late hours when they thought I was alone in my room being paranoid, I'd been building something. When I opened the reinforced door and flicked on the hand-crank generator, lighting up the space I'd created, I heard someone gasp. It was a full shelter, a Faraday cage I'd constructed from scratch using spare materials and equipment I'd squirreled away. The walls were lined with copper mesh, the floor reinforced, every seal checked and double-checked. Supplies lined the walls, water, food, medical equipment, blankets, everything we'd need to survive. And in the corner, my analog monitoring equipment, already tracking the storm raging above us. They stared at it like they were seeing a miracle. Ronan's voice was barely a whisper. You built all this?" "When?" I turned to look at him, and I let him see everything in my eyes, the hurt, the anger, the vindication. "While you were calling me crazy? While you were laughing at me in the mess hall? While you were creating protocols to silence me, I was down here preparing to save your lives because apparently someone had to." The weight of that statement hit them like a physical force. "Now get inside. We're running out of time, and I'd really prefer not to watch you all die of radiation poisoning after I went through all this trouble." We sealed ourselves inside that shelter, 8 people crammed into a space I'd designed for maybe 4, and the sounds from above were like nothing I'd ever heard. Metal screaming as it twisted and tore, wind howling like a living thing trying to claw its way inside, and that eerie crackling of the sky burning itself alive visible through the small, reinforced porthole. They huddled together in the corner, pressed against each other for comfort I couldn't give them. While I stood at my monitoring station tracking the storm's progression with equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum, Ronan approached me after about 6 hours, moving carefully like he was afraid I might bite. "How long will this last?" he asked, his voice stripped of all its usual authority. I didn't look up from my readings. 18 hours, give or take. He stood there for a long moment, and I could feel him wanting to say something, wrestling with words that probably tasted like ash in his mouth. Finally, it came out. "We would have all died out there." I still didn't look at him. "Yes, you would have." There wasn't anything else to say. We both knew the truth hanging between us, heavy and undeniable. Around hour 6, Bexley broke. I'd been waiting for it, honestly, watching the guilt eat at her with every passing minute. She came and sat beside me, her face blotchy from crying, and her voice came out small and broken. "I slapped you, Thea. In front of everyone I was so cruel to you, and you're still saving my life." The shelter went quiet, everyone listening now, because this was the conversation they'd all been dreading. I finally turned to look at her, really look at her, and I saw my former friend buried somewhere under all that shame and regret. "Yes," I said simply. "You were cruel." She flinched like I'd hit her back. But right now, in this moment, survival matters more than grudges. We can deal with what you did to me after we're not in immediate danger of dying. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that. But it was acknowledgement that we were all human, all flawed, all capable of being terrible when we were scared or insecure. By hour 12, the dam really broke. Ronan couldn't keep quiet anymore, couldn't sit with his guilt in silence. "I should have listened to you," he said to the whole group, his voice raw. "You tried to tell me multiple times. You showed me the data, the projections, everything. And I dismissed you because—" He trailed off, but I knew why. Because admitting I was right would have meant admitting he was wrong, and men like Ronan had built entire careers on never being wrong. Holden spoke up then, and I'll give him credit. He sounded genuinely remorseful. "We made you feel insane for being right. We ganged up on you. We turned you into the villain when you were trying to be the hero." One by one, each team member found their voice, acknowledging their role in what they'd done to me. Some apologies sounded real, born from genuine reflection and shame. Others sounded like fear talking, like people saying what they thought I wanted to hear because I held their lives in my hands. I accepted them all with a simple nod, not because I was ready to forgive, but because what was the alternative? We were stuck together in a metal box while the world ended outside, and holding on to rage would only poison the air we were all breathing. But something fundamental had changed between us, a shift in the power dynamic that could never be undone. They'd see me differently now, and more importantly, I'd see myself differently. I wasn't the crazy girl anymore. I was the woman who'd been right when it mattered most. 19 hours after we sealed ourselves in, the sky finally went quiet. The screaming wind died, the crackling energy faded, and through that small porthole I watched the aurora return to something almost resembling normal. Still bright, still active, but no longer trying to kill us. We emerged from the shelter like survivors of an apocalypse, which I guess we were, and what we found above made even me catch my breath. The station was destroyed, walls had collapsed inward, equipment melted into twisted sculptures of metal and plastic, entire sections exposed to the elements. But the shelter zone, the area I'd specifically reinforced during those paranoid late nights, stood intact. A perfect circle of survival in a landscape of destruction. We were alive because I'd prepared, because I'd trusted myself when no one else would. The irony hung in the frozen air, so thick you could taste it, and nobody said a word because what could they possibly say? My flares, those 3 red distress signals they'd mocked me for, had done their job perfectly. A rescue team arrived 36 hours after the storm passed, their helicopters cutting through the Arctic silence like salvation itself. They'd been dispatched the moment my flares lit up their systems, had mobilized immediately, but had to wait for the plasma storm to clear before they could reach us. The rescue captain, a weathered woman named Chen with kind eyes, took one look at the destruction, and then at me. Good thing someone here had the sense to call for help when they did another 6 hours and this whole structure would have been unsalvageable. You saved lives." Everyone looked at me then, really looked at me, and Ronan stepped forward with something I'd never seen on his face before: genuine humility. "Thea saved all our lives," he said clearly, making sure Chen heard every word. Twice. Once with the warning flare, and once with preparations nobody believed she needed to make. It was the closest thing to a public apology I was going to get, and honestly, it was enough. The real vindication came when Chen reviewed my data, the backups I'd kept safe in the shielded shelter, the complete record of my predictions and warnings, and the team's responses. She sat in the ruins of our lab, scrolling through my projections on a ruggedized tablet, and her expression shifted from interest to shock to something like awe. "This is unprecedented," she said, looking up at me. "You predicted this event with remarkable accuracy. The timing, the intensity, the radiation levels, all of it? How?" I met her eyes steadily. "I tried to warn them, multiple times." Ronan was standing close enough to hear, and I watched the weight of his failure settle on his shoulders like physical pain. Chen turned to him, her voice professional but cold. "You're the station supervisor? We'll need to have a long discussion about your emergency protocols, or rather, your complete lack of them." On the flight out, strapped into uncomfortable jump seats in the rescue helicopter, the team was subdued. Bexley sat beside me and didn't speak, just quietly offered me a protein bar from her emergency kit. A small gesture, but it was something a crack in the wall between us. Holden caught my eye from across the cabin and nodded with what looked like genuine respect. No trace of that condescending smirk. Ronan sat alone by the window, staring out at the ruined station growing smaller beneath us. And I realized something profound. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need any of their approval or acknowledgement. I'd saved them because it was the right thing to do, because letting people die when you can prevent it isn't something you do, not if you want to live with yourself. But I hadn't done it to prove anything to them. I'd done it because I knew my worth, even when they didn't, and that made all the difference. 3 months passed like a dream I was still processing. I got recruited to a new research facility, one of the top atmospheric science centers in the world, and they didn't just offer me a position, they offered me a leadership role, my own team, full autonomy, the kind of resources I'd only fantasized about in the Arctic. My findings from the plasma storm event were published in every major scientific journal, and suddenly I wasn't the paranoid analyst anymore. I was being called a pioneer, a visionary, someone who'd predicted the unpredictable and saved lives doing it. The scientific community that had quietly doubted me, that had whispered about my false alarm from years ago, now wanted my expertise on every panel and conference. It was vindication on a scale I'd never imagined. But the strangest part was how little it affected me emotionally. I'd already proven what I needed to prove, to the only person whose opinion really mattered, myself. A letter arrived one afternoon, handwritten on real paper, which was unusual enough to make me pause. It was from Bexley. I almost didn't open it, my finger hovering over the envelope for a long moment, but curiosity won. She'd been in therapy, she wrote, working through why she'd turned on me so viciously, why she'd needed to tear me down when I was trying to help. The letter was honest in a way that hurt to read, acknowledging things I don't think she'd ever admitted to herself before: jealousy, insecurity, the toxic need to belong to the powerful group even when that group was wrong. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, which I appreciated. She was just acknowledging the harm, taking ownership of her choices, and telling me she was trying to be better. I didn't respond immediately. The letter sat on my desk for 2 weeks while I decided how I felt about it, but I didn't throw it away either. Maybe that was its own kind of answer. Healing doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline, and forgiveness isn't something you owe people just because they finally understand what they did wrong. I heard through mutual contacts that Ronan had lost his position, not because I'd reported him, I hadn't and I never would, but because the official investigation into the Arctic incident revealed a pattern of negligence that couldn't be ignored, multiple safety protocols violated, warnings dismissed, a leadership style that prioritized ego over evidence. He was teaching now at a small university somewhere in the Midwest, apparently humbled by the experience, according to people who'd run into him at conferences. When someone told me this over coffee, expecting some reaction, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even the faint warmth of vindication, just complete indifference. Ronan wasn't part of my story anymore. He was a chapter I'd closed and moved past, and whatever journey he was on now was his own to navigate. I'd wasted enough energy on caring about his opinion. I wasn't about to waste any more on his consequences. The real full-circle moment came 6 months after the incident. I was invited to give a keynote lecture at an international symposium on crisis prediction and emergency preparedness. The auditorium was massive, packed with hundreds of scientists, young and old, all there to hear about atmospheric science and disaster prevention. But I didn't want to just talk about the technical aspects. I wanted to tell them the real story, the human story, because that's where the actual lesson lived. So I stood at that podium, looked out at all those eager faces, and I told them everything. The warnings no one believed. The isolation of being right when everyone said I was wrong. The humiliation of being locked in my quarters while the sky caught fire. And the moment when the people who'd destroyed me came begging for the help I'd prepared despite their mockery. Trust your data, I told them, and the room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Trust your instincts. Do the work even when no one's watching, even when everyone's laughing, and when the whole world tells you you're wrong. When your colleagues turn their backs and your supervisor threatens your career, make absolutely sure you're prepared to be right. Because being right isn't about winning arguments or getting apologies. It's about having the courage to act on what you know is true, regardless of the cost. The standing ovation that followed felt earned in a way that all the journal publications and job offers hadn't. These people understood. They'd felt that same doubt, that same pressure to conform, that same fear of being the one voice of dissent. And maybe my story would give some of them the courage to trust themselves when it mattered most. Walking off that stage, I thought about where I'd been a year ago. Isolated, doubted, treated like I was losing my mind for trying to save lives, and I thought about where I was now, respected, heard, secure in my own worth regardless of external validation. The journey between those 2 points had been brutal, but it had forged something unbreakable inside me. I'd learned that you can't control whether people believe you, whether they support you, whether they treat you with the respect you deserve, but you can control whether you believe yourself, whether you do the right thing even when it's hard, whether you become the kind of person who saves lives not for recognition, but because it's who you are at your core. They mocked my warning flare until the sky showed them the real threat. They dismissed me until their survival depended on everything I'd prepared alone in the dark. But the satisfaction wasn't in their apologies or their fear or even their gratitude. The satisfaction was in knowing I'd become someone who couldn't be shaken by doubt, someone who trusted her own mind even when the whole world said she was crazy. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making them suffer. It's becoming so strong, so secure in your own truth that their opinions stop mattering entirely, and that's exactly what I did. If you've ever been doubted, dismissed, or told you're too much, too paranoid, too intense, this one's for you. Hit that like button if you believe in trusting yourself even when the world doesn't. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to back down when everyone said they should, and comment below. I want to know, what's something you were right about that nobody believed? What's your warning flare moment? Because I guarantee you're not alone. Until next time, keep trusting your gut, keep doing the work, and keep firing those flares into the sky. Someone's always watching, and when the real threat comes, they'll remember who tried to warn them. Stay strong out there.